It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The Gazan city turned into a wasteland almost a year into the war. Sky News films inside the flattened city of Rafah.
It's impossible to know whether this kind of level of destruction was militarily necessary or whether it was some scorched earth policy.
Labour's relations with their biggest union backer turn frosty as the row over winter fuel payments heats up. The government on the defensive with a man freed from prison under an early release scheme back in jail charged with sexual assault. After months of controversy, Strictly Come Dancing made its return tonight with chaperones watching the rehearsals. In sport, Gloucestershire win cricket's T20 Blast final for the first time. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. It's almost a year since the 7th of October's attacks sparked the war in Gaza, and the Israeli response has flattened much of the territory. Sky News has been given rare access inside the city of Rafah in the Gaza Strip to see firsthand the level of destruction. And today there have been reports that at least 14 people have been killed in a strike to the east of Gaza City. We were taken into the region through the Philadelphia corridor, which runs along Gaza's border with Egypt. Israel still bans foreign journalists from entering Gaza independently. Sky News was granted access by the Israeli military, though our team's movements were restricted and the material we gathered had to be authorised by the IDF. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, reports.
This was Rafah. 250,000 people lived here before the war. Today it is almost deserted. The IDF says it has now defeated Hamas's Rafah brigade, but pockets of Hamas fighters remain. As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street. A Hamas sniper had been spotted.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade. The houses here in the foreground that are all flattened, that is because the Israeli military has demolished and blown up the tunnel network underneath them.
International journalists are still banned from entering Gaza independently. Travelling with the IDF is the only way in. The Israeli military checked our pictures before broadcast, but didn't ask us to change anything. Artillery shells have blown holes in walls and revealed the privacy of family lives before. Clothes still hang in a wardrobe, left, presumably, as the owners fled. The innocence of a child's tricycle is a flash of colour amid the grey dust and rubble. Bullet holes decorate walls and ceilings. I know how bad this looks, one soldier privately told me, but we had no choice. Hamas had months to prepare for the Rafah fight. They set booby traps in houses and fought hard. So, though, quite clearly, did the IDF.
I mean, look at this. There's nothing I can say that does more justice than the pictures themselves. And it's impossible to know whether this kind of level of destruction was militarily necessary or whether it was some scorched earth policy. But surely, if there is ever a ceasefire here, this is going to take decades to rebuild.
The 6 Israeli hostages murdered 2 weeks ago were found in this tunnel. The entry shaft was under a child's bedroom, painted with Disney figures. It joins a vast underground network, tens of kilometres long, much of it still uncovered. We drove into Gaza along the Egyptian border, the Philadelphia corridor, newly tarmacked and under Israeli control. The Israeli military says it's uncovered 9 tunnels running into Egypt. They'd already been blocked off by Hamas before the Israelis got there. Machines nearby are drilling deep into the ground in search of more tunnels. Hamas insists the IDF must leave here. Benjamin Netanyahu is refusing.
The role of the IDF is to achieve the defeat, the military control, and make the cabinet do the political decision for the future.
But you have defeated the Rafah Brigade.
What I mean, we have created the conditions for the cabinet to make the decisions for the future.
So you've created the conditions, you've eliminated most of the Rafah Brigade, you've got control of the Philadelphia crossing, so the cabinet has a number of options it could choose.
Exactly.
There is still hopeful talk of a ceasefire, but frankly, it doesn't feel likely. The war in Gaza is changing. It's moving towards a grinding counterinsurgency. And if that's what the Israeli government wants, then it could be like this for years. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Rafah, southern Gaza.
The row over Labour's winter fuel payment intensified today, with the party's biggest union backer accusing the government of cruelty. The Unite Union is planning on submitting a motion at the Labour conference later this month, calling on the Prime Minister to rethink. It comes as the Liberal Democrats began their party conference by continuing to push for a U-turn on the policy. Cuts to the winter fuel payment means 10 million pensioners will miss out on the allowance of up to £300. The government also believe an estimated 780,000 pensioners who are entitled to pension credit and therefore eligible for fuel payments will not submit a claim and will therefore lose the payment altogether. The data also says around 71% of disabled pensioners, about 1.6 million people, will lose their entitlement to the winter fuel payment, as will 83% or 2.7 million of those aged 80 and over. Our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh has more.
The Liberal Democrats aren't ashamed about how they get coverage. And after their best general election ever, they're not about to stop now. Fantastic. But one thing that could pull focus away from their conference today is this.
Obviously, we've had to take difficult decisions given the economic circumstances we're in for reasons that I have explained.
It was here in Brighton 1 week ago today where Keir Starmer addressed the Trade Union Congress. He didn't mention the winter fuel payment cut to 10 million pensioners. But in a memo seen by Sky News, Unite Union, one of Labour's biggest backers, has accused the government of being cruel over the cuts and say they will submit a motion to Labour's conference next week. Unite say working class communities are facing devastation from jobless transitions to net zero. I make no apology for holding Labour's feet to the fire.
We are going to oppose this decision by Labour. There are millions of pensioners who are just above the pension credit limit who are going to lose this money, and it's going to be really tough. In Parliament, I raised an example of a couple where the husband is caring for his wife who has MS and Alzheimer's. They're just above the pension credit limit and they're going to lose £300. They're really worried about it. And I think the government needs to think again. And Liberal Democrats will keep fighting on this.
Go and have a taste.
That pensioner, Norman, says he's now having to go back to work at age 72 just to make ends meet.
As an older person and an unpaid carer, I think we're an easy target. And it's all right for them to say they've had to make tough decisions. What tough decision have they had to make? I make tough decisions every day. Making someone else not have a winter fuel allowance, that's not tough. In fact, I felt it was rather spiteful.
The government cut winter fuel payments to help fill a £22 billion black hole they say the previous Tory government left them, and that they are committed to the pension triple lock. After winning a vote on the winter fuel payments,
Very, very important that we support Ukraine in this vital war of freedom.
the Prime Minister this week has been in Washington, D.C. with President Biden for talks on Ukraine. But while he works on strengthening the special relationship there, when he returns, he will have the task of rebuilding relations with his own backbenchers and the unions back here.
And Serena joins us from Brighton now. Serena, conference season well underway, and this winter fuel allowance row looks set to dominate for the next few weeks.
Quite possibly, and it's quite overshadowed this Lib Dem conference here in Brighton today. Let's not forget, though, that the government did win this vote. This has already gone through the Commons. This is already policy, but this row is ongoing, and now unions have got involved too, which means that it could be at Labour conference, this wound could be opened again. Now, how this motion works is that debate could be open to the floor. And remember, there was 12 unaccounted for abstentions by Labour backbenchers. So if this row does, in fact, rumble on, we may get a bit more of an insight into who those are. Now, back to the Lib Dem conference, which is where I am. That dramatic entrance by Ed Davey that you saw in my report, I think was completely overshadowed. The winter fuel was the question he was repeatedly asked. And I think he wanted to show this conference how historic the Lib Dems' win had been for them, 72 MPs. I think now the question for them, though, is how are they going to use that big number of MPs to their advantage? If Labour MPs aren't listening to their own backbenchers, how can the Lib Dems get them to listen, the government to listen to their party?
Serena, thank you. And Trevor Phillips will have plenty more on that and all the rest of the week's politics tomorrow morning from 8:30 a.m. His guests include the Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the Shadow Home Secretary and Tory leadership hopeful James Cleverly. The government has defended its prison early release scheme after a man freed was recalled to jail. He's alleged to have sexually assaulted a woman very shortly after his release. Our correspondent Sadia Chowdhury joins us from outside the Ministry of Justice. And Sadia, what exactly are the government saying?
Well, this was never a non-controversial policy in the first place, not least because of the sheer amount of consideration that judges give when setting a prison term in the first place, but because there were those warnings from domestic abuse campaigners and charities who warned that some violent offenders may be released too soon. But the government went ahead with the policy anyway, calling it an emergency and temporary measure aimed at easing overcrowding in prisons. And that meant that some prisoners who are supposed to have served at least 50% of their sentences were released having served just 40% of those sentences. 1,700 prisoners released early last week. Among them, Sky News understands a man who is now accused of immediately reoffending. British Transport Police today said they charged a man in his 30s with sexual assault after an incident at Sittingbourne railway station in Kent. The force said the man had been recalled to prison, and we understand that he'd been released from HMP Swaleside just minutes, if not hours, before the alleged offence that he is now accused of. So the government may have a case to answer, and today it defended the policy, and today the Ministry of Justice issued this statement. It said, the government inherited prisons in crisis and on the brink of collapse. Had that happened, the courts would have been unable to hold trials and the police to make arrests. We had no choice but to introduce emergency measures, releasing some prisoners a few weeks or months early while excluding a number of offences and imposing strict licence conditions. While we cannot comment on the details of any single case, those who break their licence conditions or commit further crimes will be punished. So there you go, calling it an emergency measure, but one that may now come to turn up the heat on the government.
Sadia, thank you. The manufacturer of an anti-epileptic drug, Valproate, has been ordered to pay more than £200,000 to a French mother whose children were damaged in the womb. The verdict by the French court has been closely watched by campaigners in the UK. Well, our home editor, Jason Farrell, has covered this story extensively and joins me now in the studio. And first of all, Jason, tell us about this drug, what it's prescribed for and how it can be detrimental.
So it's a drug that's for epilepsy sufferers and it's to help them with their seizures. But if you are pregnant when you take it, there is a chance, a fairly substantial risk actually, that the child could be born with what's called fetal Valproate fetal syndrome. And that is, it can be anything from congenital malformations to learning difficulties. And there's been lots of campaigns around this, but what's really significant is that there's been a successful legal challenge in France with a payout to a mother called Marie Martin who took this claim. And the drug company was told that they were responsible for a lack of information, for marketing a product that knew to be defective, and a lack of vigilance. And she was awarded €250,000. And now Sanofi say that they're going to challenge this. They say that they felt they did tell the regulator about the known dangers as they evolved, and it was the regulator that didn't act. But what's significant here is that there was an attempt to make an illegal challenge in the UK, but it basically didn't get the funding, and it was discontinued in 2010. And Emma Friedman and her son Andy were part of this campaign. That's Emma and Andy there. And she says, this sends out a clear message that they should have acted to prevent harm. And of course, what she's also saying is they didn't have their day in court. And the other thing to mention is that the French already have a fund funded by the government of €58 million so far, paid out to over 1,000 valproate victims. And yet, here in the UK, nothing has been paid to the victims. There's been reviews that have suggested that there should be a fund set up for the valproate victims. The government have continually looked at that, but as yet, there has neither been a successful legal challenge in the courts, and nor has there been any fund, and yet they have exactly the same problems as all the sufferers in France.
Just very quickly, is the drug still being prescribed
The
in this
drug
country?
is prescribed, and it now, thanks to the campaigners, has plenty of warnings on the leaflets about not taking it when pregnant.
OK, Jason, thank you. There's been an exchange of prisoners of war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed 103 people were released on both sides. The Russian soldiers handed over are said to have been captured in the Kursk region, where Kyiv's forces seized land last month. Mr. Zelensky claimed that the incursion into Russian territory helped bring about the exchange. Speaking to Sky News, Ukrainian MP Maria Metsentseva welcomed the news.
That's brilliant news. I'm sure all Ukrainian people are extremely happy about that, because when we talk about prisoners of war, civilians in captivity, that is the fourth point of President Zelensky's peace plan that was widely discussed recently in Switzerland. I would like to remind that under the Geneva Conventions, civilians can't be taken into captivity. Nevertheless, Russian Federation is breaching all international humanitarian law and does it.
And some breaking news to bring you this evening. An 18-year-old man has been charged with murder after a woman and two teenagers were found dead in a flat in Luton. Bedfordshire police say the victims were found with injuries at the property in Leebank in the early hours of Friday, but died at the scene. Nicholas Prosper, who lives in Luton, was also charged with a number of firearms offences. At least 5 people have died in eastern Romania following torrential rainstorms that left people stranded in flooded areas. Emergency workers found the bodies of 3 elderly women and 2 men. Almost 100 people were rescued in the hard-hit eastern counties of Galatai and Vaslui. The funeral service of Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei has taken place in Uganda today. The marathon runner who competed at the Paris Olympics died after her ex-partner doused her in petrol and set her alight in Kenya earlier this month. The service was held in Bukwo, close to the Kenyan border. The Pope has made a surprise intervention into US politics, telling American Catholics to choose what he described as the lesser of 2 evils in November's presidential election. Pope Francis criticised former President Donald Trump for his position on migration and Vice President Kamala Harris for her stance on abortion, calling both anti-life. Around 1 in 5 Americans are Catholic. Amelia Harper reports.
Arriving to thousands of supporters in Singapore is a man whose opinion matters to millions. Pope Francis on a 12-day international tour of Asia. And on a plane journey back to Rome, asked by the press his thoughts on the 2 US presidential hopefuls.
Both are against life, whether it is the one who is chasing away migrants or the one that kills children. Both are against life. I cannot decide. You must vote, and you must choose the lesser evil. Who is the lesser evil? That lady or that gentleman?
In an unusually vocal move, his subtle choice not to name the two candidates has raised questions about why he's speaking out at all. The issues touched on, though, abortion and migration, both key election issues. Kamala Harris's support for abortion and Donald Trump's proposed crackdown on immigration under fire, and it's not the first time. About Trump's election campaign plans to build a wall on the border with Mexico, the Pope questioned his Christian faith in 2016, before a somewhat stiff meeting at the Vatican a year later on the new US president's first foreign trip. But how important is his critique?
I would say it's exceptional if he chooses to wade in to the degree he did. I suppose it reflects the stakes of the U.S. election. Everybody watches the U.S. election with great interest, and certainly they do at the Vatican. I would say, again, he was careful not to say vote for one or the other. But yes, probably he could have, I suppose, demurred or avoided the question more than he did.
Kamala Harris.
What can't be avoided is the choice American voters will soon have to make between Harris and Trump. Neither of November's choices, according to the Pope, preferable. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
Strictly Come Dancing returned tonight for a new series. The hit BBC show has been at the centre of bullying allegations, which sparked an investigation by the corporation. Sky News has spoken to one of this year's contestants about the claims. Emma Birchley has more.
And the National Television Award goes to... Strictly Come Dancing!
Winning Best Talent Show at the National Television Awards for the 9th year running, Strictly, it seems, is unstoppable. Claims of bullying by two professional dancers prompted speculation the pre-Christmas Saturday night institution was set to be axed. Instead, it's back for its 20th anniversary series with a new lineup, including Love Island star Tasha Ghouri, clearly undeterred by the controversy.
I'm going into this with my own experience, I do this for myself. It's something I've dreamt of for so many years. I wasn't there last year, so for me, I want to have my own experience and have the best time.
Dancing the Foxtrot, Amanda Abington and Giovanni Panice.
It was actress Amanda Abington's complaints of alleged cruel behaviour by Panice that saw him removed from the show, claims he rejects. Further revelations then saw Graziano Di Prima ditched from the lineup after admitting kicking his dance partner. He apologised for his actions.
It prompted the BBC to introduce chaperones for the new series, as well as two welfare producers, with bosses saying they hoped it would enable the programme to recover and move forward as filming returns here to Elstree Studios.
And all the signs are it will, despite the damage to its reputation.
I think it's just such a loved show that it's kind of unstoppable. I think they've been quite transparent with the audience, so they came out and explained quite thoroughly what they're doing to make changes to try and avoid this situation happening again. So by explaining that they've got chaperones now happening, it kind of gives peace of mind that there's a fix to the situation.
For all the recent negative press, most former contestants have nothing but love.
I think Strictly is such an amazing show. I loved being on it. I was terrible, obviously, but I loved being on it. And there's so many great people on it that I hope that doesn't affect the show.
An investigation into the claims is ongoing, but whatever's revealed, it seems Strictly is destined to keep dancing. Emma Birchley, Sky News, Hertfordshire.
Time now to cross to Sky Sports News for an update with James.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
May 2022, you described the one-day job as too cushy to contemplate. What's changed?
Look, I think firstly, I was very content doing what I was doing in terms of helping Stokesy run the test side. We've had a great couple of years, so I think we've achieved some pretty cool stuff, even though we're not the finished article yet. But when Kezi rang me and said, is there a world in which you can do it all? It didn't take a whole lot of persuading, to be honest, because I think, back then I didn't have a lot of information about English cricket. I felt at the time that white ball team was in a very good space, and they were obviously being very successful, and my skills are normally more towards trying to rejuvenate a side and try and bring about some soul and some structure of how you want to play the game. I guess you fast forward to now, I look around and I think I've had a couple of years where I've been ingrained in English cricket, understand the systems and the structures and the people, and probably most importantly, I understand the talent which sits within this country, and that excites me.
You said almost your USP is regenerating and rejuvenating teams. Do you feel therefore that's what the one-day team needs now?
I think there's a thirst for change. I think firstly, you look back on where the one-day and T20 team have been, they've been incredibly successful. They've won a couple of World Cups. They've had some once-in-a-generation cricketers come through that period who have now, I guess, come towards the end of their run. So it's in need of refreshing and bringing in some of that new talent that has probably been inspired by the very people that they're going to end up replacing. So there's some opportunities in the next little while to be able to bring some of that new talent in, wrap it around some of the existing players that are there, some of the leaders that are there, and try and hopefully bring what we've been able to achieve in Test cricket and the style of play and the positivity with which we try and operate.
You talked about some of the leaders that are established in there. One is obviously Josh Butler. He's not going to be captaining the T20 side because of injury, but he is the white ball captain at the moment. Are you convinced and sure that he's the right man for the job in the medium term?
Yeah, definitely. I think I spoke to Josh the other day, actually. I think Josh had an unbelievable career. If he was to, and this is what I said to him, if he was to retire tomorrow, he goes down as arguably the greatest white ball player England's ever had. He has nothing left to prove. So what I want him to be able to get to a space in the next few years where he isn't trying to protect anything. He just goes out there, absolutely loves playing for England, loves leading the England white ball side, and is able to get the most out of the talent around him. And that's my responsibility, is to keep pushing him towards that and keep reaffirming that message to him. You know, Josh right now, hopefully he'll be back from his injuries soon. The priority will very much be the Champions Trophy, so we're going to make sure that he's ready for that. But it actually gives us a bit of time as well, even if he's not involved in the series. It gives us some time to be able to spark those conversations and start to formulate some structures and plans and start to marry up our beliefs and the language that we're going to use with the team to make sure that we get the most out of the talent that sits in that dressing room.
You mentioned language there. That seems one of the obvious advantages of unifying the roles, this kind of consistency of messaging, if you like. What are the dangers, though? Rob Key talked about.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the writer and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner, and the political commentator, Benedict Spence. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of the Times. Its headline, Prime Minister told to go it alone and let Ukraine fire missiles. We'll be right back. Do stay with us.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Independent, united.
United Kingdom.
These last few years have seen some huge stories. And these stories have been driven by politics, by politicians, the people in power.
You must stay at home.
And it's my job to figure out how these decisions made by politicians impact all of us in our everyday lives.
This is the worst thing I've ever been